Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the El Romerillo Wash Process Peru from Leuchtfeuer Coffee. And there's the bag right there. And Leuchtfeuer, based out of Wedel, Germany. And once again, they were a suggestion to us by Uluman. So once again, shout out to and thank you to Uluman for the suggestion. This is part 2 of our 4-part Leuchtfeuer series and our second ever full bag review from this coffee roaster. And when deciding which standard wash processed coffee to go with, it was between this Peru and a Kenyan coffee. And I realized that when it comes to coffee roasters that we don't have any familiarity with, I typically opt for the Kenyan coffee. So I decided to switch it up and try the Peru instead. So we will see how this one turned out, as this right here is day 38. And recipe we went with for this coffee was Leuchtfeuer's recipe, which is a 15:1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 93 degrees Celsius, about 199 degrees Fahrenheit. And I like this one a little better through the Chemex, which indicates a more medium grind. Roast profile for this coffee, they do have this one listed as a medium. However, I would say that it is still lighter relative to a lot of other coffee roasters out there. So the best way I could kind of describe this one is maybe on the more developed side of a light coffee, as this one is still pretty light by most standards and metrics, if maybe on the slightly more developed side of that very light. With that out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. Day 16, first impression, ran it through the Chemex, and it was a little interesting, as the first impression I had was this very strong bitterness right off the brew, but after that it began to settle into this defined milk chocolate aspect. Once the bitterness did dissipate, the entire cup provided great structure and clarity with plenty of the sweeter stone fruits that they had listed, as well as some of the chocolate attributes. So it was a mixed start. I can't really explain that bitterness, as it's not something that I necessarily experienced from that point going forward. However, it was something that I felt was very much worth making a note of. So day 19, ran it through the V60, and it was a much better day, as there was even more of that previously mentioned defined chocolate aspect to the cup. In addition to that, there was a pretty strong honey component too that was equally as well defined. Very clean and structured, much better day from the second impression, and I really appreciated just how well defined this cup was. Day 22, ran it through the April dripper, and the cup does continue to offer this mild fruit brightness with an emphasis remaining on the South American characteristics of this rich chocolate at the forefront. Honeyed aspect yet again, so up to this point it's been pretty consistent. But we continue on to day 25, and once again, I did not realize that they had their own brewing recommendations for their coffees. So I just kind of went a little higher on this one, wanted to push this one a little bit more, and higher temps, a little bit more fine of a grind. And the way the coffee has been at this day is the best I've enjoyed it, as there was an added nutty aspect to the cup, with plenty of that previously listed chocolate and honey, with a little bit more clean and vibrant stone fruit within the cup. A little bit darker in that sense too, so I think they have plum listed as one of their stone fruits. I actually can't read German, but I think I remember them having plum on there. I could see that. It was a little bit more of a darker fruit vibrancy to the cup. And then there was an almost fudgy attribute to the cup. That's something that I will probably go back to a fair bit, as that's one of the most defining factors of this coffee going forward. Day 28, that's again when I kind of realized that they have their own recipe. So I adjusted it to their recipe, and the overall cup is slightly improved, as that near fudgy aspect is at the forefront of the cup. This time complemented by what I would describe as a raisin-like quality, with plenty more of those darker fruits, a lot of darker aspects just in general. This is a very dark themed cup of coffee, which worked well for me. Honey is still pretty prominent, but an overall nice day to the cup. Day 31. Once again, their recipe, this time through the Chemex, and the cup did have a slight bit more vibrancy, and it continued to have a fair bit of texture even with the brew method that we went with. Very well defined chocolate fudgy aspects yet again, as the cup continues to remain pretty consistent with more of the honey and darker fruit attributes yet again. This coffee from the start was pretty clean and well defined, and even though the Chemex did kind of just accentuate that, I really appreciated that. Sometimes I feel like it might be a little over the top and overkill, unnecessary to provide that extra bit of clarity, but this one right here kind of really sharpened out those edges, and as a result it really fits the way that this coffee was going, so much more well defined on this day. Day 33, back through the V60 with their recipe, more textured yet again, with the chocolate being the most defined component to the cup. Continues to remain consistent, though it is opening up a little bit more with time. It's continuing to improve all around with just a little bit more time in general. So Here on day 38, still a really nice cup of coffee. I feel like it continues to improve ever so slightly. Day 35, final notes, once again through the Chemex, and there was a slight preference to this brew method. As I kind of mentioned earlier, it seems to clear up in ever so slightly, well, a clean cup to begin with. It clears it up ever so slightly, offering a little bit more of the lighter side of the stone fruits as well. So you were getting a fair bit of this fruit vibrancy to it. That was maybe overshadowed by what was a little bit more defined of a honey as well as a fudgy kind of chocolate-like cup. But even then, I really appreciated the brightness, especially the fruit brightness that was coming from it. So on this day, day 35, it's the best it had been up to that point. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. We have a lot of level 4s, so let's go through those real quick. And we will start with the cleanliness level 4. Yes, as I always say, when it comes to wash processed coffees, unless there's something uniquely special about them, and it's typically just either some washed Ethiopians, but more likely washed Panamanian Geshes that scored that level 5. But this one right here had great structure, great clarity, great definition to it. So I really think that this was maybe on the slightly higher side of the level 4. At no point was it pushing that level 5, but a very clean cup of coffee starts to finish. Finish, level 4. Yes, and it had a couple of things in that finish. That honey-like aspect that I've been mentioning a lot, as well as that kind of fudgy chocolate aspect to it. Both present, a little bit of the brightness lingers as well. So finish, level 4, yes, definitely there. Sweetness, level 4. Yes, this is still a very sweet cup of coffee, and it skews maybe in the direction of a sweetness that isn't as much my preference. I typically like the fruity or floral sweetness a little bit more. But even then, the more robust kind of South American characteristics in a much more sweet manner worked well for me. I appreciated that within this cup as well. Acidity, level 4. Yes, and while this one may not necessarily be as bright and as acidic as either the previous coffee we'd reviewed or maybe some of the ones coming up, that's what I'm saying about this roast profile is they may have it listed as a medium. Even then, it's not necessarily the most developed coffee. There's still a fair bit of lightness to this one as well. That's why I was able to experience a fair bit of brightness to the cup. That, of course, being a little bit more in the stone fruits direction, some of those more darker stone fruits, as well as towards the end, a little bit more of the lighter stone fruits. So level 4, I feel like it has that fair bit of brightness to the cup. Florality, level 4. Yes, this one has a little bit more definition than the Guji in the sense that I could say that this was much more of that floral honey, and it was very well defined, very well pronounced, and very much justified at that level 4 mark, one of the more defining factors within this coffee. Stone fruit, level 4. Yes, and I mentioned that at the start I was experiencing a lot more of those darker stone fruits, but I think with a little bit more time, you were experiencing a little bit more of the other ones that were present within it. Definitely not peachy, definitely a little bit more of a sugary stone fruits to it, so a little bit more of that jammy. So typically that's associated with me, a little bit more in line with an apricot. So you can see that at level 4. Chocolate, level 4. Yes, I've been mentioning that there's this kind of very textured, fudgy, kind of more robust chocolate within the cup. Fully expected. We're working with a washed South American coffee, approving coffee at that too, so not surprising in that sense. And then we still have a handful of level 3s. We will start with the spice at level 3. Yes, there's this ever so slight spice-like quality to the cup. I couldn't quite put my finger on what exactly that was, but it was a little bit on the sweeter side of things too, so we could even think of something like a slight cinnamon. Even then, it was pronounced enough to reach all the way up there at that level 3, so a fair bit of that maybe slightly sweeter spice within this cup. Berry fruit. Level 3, yes, and I mentioned that there were some times where I was getting maybe a little bit more dark of a berry fruit component to it. I most distinctly listed raisin, which I imagine would probably fall in that berry fruit category, but even then you can make a case for just a darker berry, a slightly sweeter darker berry within this cup. Citrus fruit, level 3, yes. I would say that while it may not necessarily be quite as well defined as some of the other things we've mentioned there, there's a fair bit of the citric brightness to the cup as well. And that might be a little generous at the level 3, but even then I feel like it was pronounced enough to justify that mark. Caramel, level 3. Yes, that's another thing I haven't necessarily mentioned, but I did say that there was a lot of sweetness to this cup, and it's a lot of that kind of traditional South American sweetness as well, with a slightly more lighter profiled South American coffee. This is still lighter than a lot of the other South American coffees I review, so level 3, yes, I can see that. Smokiness, level 3, I know that's a little high. I wouldn't say that it was necessarily an overly smoky coffee. Drinking here on day 38, I'm like, that might be a little bit of a stretch, but it wasn't a bad smokiness. Typically, when it gets to that mark, it's not necessarily my favorite, but I think it's that it can be a good thing in certain aspects. And then I think the final thing worth discussing is the body, level 3. It's on the higher side of level 3. I think what really played a role in it finalizing that spot was that I preferred the Chemex to this one. Through the V60, maybe I can push it all the way up to the level 4, but at the very least it's at the higher side of the level 3, a fair bit of that texture and body to this cup, which kind of added to a cup that already had a lot of great things within it. So for people that really like the body within their coffee, then this one right here also offered a fair bit of that too. So I think I'm pretty much in agreement with this tasting wheel. I think it's a pretty nice representation of what I was getting from this coffee. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. I think it's a little unfortunate that I haven't reviewed too many Peruvian coffees this year, because I feel like I would be able to safely say that this is one of the more enjoyable Peruvian coffees that I have had this year. Once again, like the Gucci, it's no huge game changer. This isn't going to be one of my favorite coffees of the entire year, but the first two coffees I have discussed from this coffee roaster have been above average and very good coffees for me, ones that I've enjoyed. And it was nice that these were the standard offerings, because the next two coffees that we are going to be discussing from them are higher end offerings. So that sets the groundwork for maybe some really positive things going forward. With this one right here, I mean, I've kind of summarized it in general. I just thought it was a really nice coffee from start to finish, and I don't think I have too much more to say on it. Type of person I would suggest this coffee to, if you like your lighter profiled South American coffees, I feel like that's a little bit of a kind of guilty pleasure myself, as when you can get those, then they come out really nice, especially if they offer great sweetness. But what really stood out about this coffee for me wasn't necessarily the sweetness, florality, or fruit components, which this one had all three of those things. It was the structure and definition of this one. That's always a huge positive when a coffee roaster can get a coffee this well defined. I'm most distinctly thinking of the La Colina, that wash processed Colombian coffee we reviewed from the barn. A very well structured coffee. But yeah, this one right here, it continued to offer so much great clarity to it from start to finish. So massive credit to Leuchtfeuer for this one. I feel like that this was a pretty nice coffee, and that's kind of the best direction I can point somebody towards for this one, and the best way I can leave this review. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, I'd love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the El Romerillo Wash Process Peru from Leuchtfeuer Coffee. Thank you for watching.